They showed up at my door with suitcases while I was 8 months pregnant. I let them in. That was my first move. I was still holding the door open when Mark said it. 8 months pregnant, feet swollen, back aching in that deep structural way that doesn't respond to anything except lying flat on the floor. And my fiancé was standing in my hallway with his mother, 2 rolling suitcases, 3 cardboard boxes, and a grin that told me he had already decided how this was going to go. "You're way too obsessed with that passport stamp," he said. "It's just prejudice." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I smiled, slowly enough that I saw the grin on his face flicker. "The only assumption here," I said, "is you two deciding my apartment is yours?" His mother Linda was already looking past me at the kitchen, the way someone looks at a room they're mentally rearranging. Mark was watching my face for the sign that I would back down, the way he had watched my face for 3 years and found that sign reliably, consistently, every time I'd chosen peace over conflict. He was about to discover that 8 months of pregnancy had done something clarifying to me. I was done choosing peace. My name is Elena Vasquez, and I want to tell you what that apartment was before I tell you what happened to it. I came to this country at 22 with a suitcase, a civil engineering degree from the University of Monterey, and a contact at a small construction consulting firm who had promised me an interview but could not promise me anything else. I spent 2 years sleeping on a pull-out sofa in the apartment of a colleague named Rosa, who was generous and patient and whose patience I tried not to abuse. I lived on $400 a month in discretionary income and saved everything else because I had decided, with the specific stubbornness of someone who has nothing to lose, that I was going to own something in this country. I bought the apartment at 31. 4 years of aggressive saving, 2 years of credit building, one very tense closing process in which the escrow company lost a document 3 days before the deadline, and I personally drove to their office, explained the situation without raising my voice, and did not leave until it was found. 2 bedrooms, top floor of a 6-unit building in a neighborhood that was still improving when I bought but has since become desirable. The kitchen I redesigned myself, hiring contractors for the structural work and doing the finishing myself on weekends. It was mine. Not in the casual financial way that ownership can sometimes feel, in the cellular, bone-deep way that something is yours when you built it with your own hands from nothing. Mark moved in 18 months ago. He was a sales consultant, tall and charming in the way that some men are charming, which is to say he had learned to perform warmth so effectively that it was easy to confuse the performance for the real thing. He had a laugh that filled rooms and a habit of making everyone around him feel interesting, which I had mistaken in the early years for genuine curiosity, but which I had more recently come to understand as a sales technique. He moved in because his apartment was being renovated. That was the explanation. Flood damage in the unit below, which had apparently compromised the subflooring. He needed somewhere to stay for 6 to 8 weeks while the work was done. The renovation had been finished for 9 months. He was still there. I had let it become ordinary. I had covered rent alone for 11 of the past 18 months because commissions were late, because a deal fell through, because the industry was going through a difficult cycle. Always a reason. Always delivered with the forehead kiss and the "you're incredible, Elena, I don't deserve you" that I now understood was doing very specific work. I had bought his groceries and paid his phone bill and not made it into a transaction because I had believed that was what love looked like. What love looked like, apparently, was him arriving at my front door at 6:30 on a Thursday evening with his mother and enough luggage for a permanent stay. The red flag I had been ignoring the longest wasn't the money. It was Linda. Mark's mother was 61 years old, sharp-tongued, and possessed of a particular worldview about what immigrant women were and weren't entitled to. She had opinions about my cooking, my housekeeping, the paint colors I'd chosen, the way I organized my refrigerator. She delivered these opinions with a smile that maintained plausible deniability, always framed as helpful, always delivered in the register of advice, but the content was consistent enough that it stopped feeling like opinion and started feeling like a project. The project of making me feel like a guest in my own space. She had visited twice since Mark moved in. Both times, I had cooked. Both times, she had made a comment about the spices I used, the way I set the table, once about a decorative piece I'd brought from home, which she described as very ethnic, with a smile that suggested she believed this was a compliment. Both times, Mark had laughed and said she was from a different generation, and I was too sensitive. I had told myself that was probably true, and then she showed up at my door with a suitcase. I let them in. I want to be clear about why. It wasn't because I didn't see it for what it was. I let them in because I am an engineer, and the first principle of engineering is, before you act, understand the load. One night, I said, "You can stay one night while I sort out what exactly is happening here." Mark said, of course, we can figure everything out in the morning." He said it the way he said most things, smoothly, easily, with the confidence of someone who believes the conversation is already decided. Linda walked past me into the kitchen and opened my refrigerator. Just opened it. The way you open your own refrigerator when you're checking what to make for dinner. She stood there with the door hanging wide and looked at the contents with a small frown, like she was disappointed in what she found. I watched her do this and made a note in my head. Mark dropped his bag on the couch and stretched, arms above his head, exhaling loudly, the exhale of a man who has arrived somewhere he considers home. He picked up the TV remote. I went to my bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened a notes app on my phone. I typed for 4 hours. 11 months of rent I had covered alone, at $2,200 per month, $24,200. His phone bill, 18 months at $95,710. Groceries. I had been conservative and meticulous about this without meaning to be, because I am constitutionally unable to buy things without tracking the expense. $680 per month average for 18 months. $12,240. The car insurance I'd added him to when his lapsed in February, $3,400 annualized. Various other expenses. Dinner bills I'd covered. A flight I'd bought when he said he couldn't afford to visit his cousin's wedding. A jacket I'd purchased because his was too thin for winter, and he hadn't gotten around to replacing it. I totaled it at 12:47 a.m. The number was $48,300. I sat with that number for a while. Then I opened my contacts and texted my attorney. Her name was Patricia Okonkwo, and she had been my attorney for 6 years, initially for the apartment closing, then for various contract matters related to my consulting work, and once when a client had refused to pay a $34,000 invoice, and she had recovered it within 3 weeks with a letter so precise it had made the client's attorney visibly uncomfortable at the one meeting they'd required to resolve things. I texted her at 12:53 a.m. I'm sorry for the time. I need a temporary occupancy agreement drafted for 2 people currently in my apartment. I need it ready before 9 a.m. I'll explain everything tomorrow. Can you do this? She responded at 1:07 a.m. I have a template. Send me the details. I have thought about that moment often since. The fact that my attorney, a woman who billed at $380 an hour and had every reason to wait until morning, responded to a midnight text in 11 minutes. I think she understood from the words currently in my apartment everything she needed to understand. I sent her the details. I fell asleep briefly around 3 a.m. and woke at 5 when the baby moved hard enough to make me gasp. By 8:30, I had a 12-page document. Breakfast. Mark and Linda at my kitchen table, coffee cups already in hand. Mine, from my cabinet, without asking. Linda was making some observations about the lack of certain things in my pantry. I set the document on the table between them. This is a temporary occupancy agreement, I said. 60 days, 1/3 of all household expenses, each. No access to the nursery, no access to my home office, documented proof of the flood damage and the projected repair timeline by this Friday. Mark picked it up and flipped through it with increasing speed and decreasing composure. You're not serious. I spoke to my attorney at 7:30 this morning. This apartment is solely in my name. I have never added you to the deed or lease, and you have no legal claim to residency beyond my consent. Sign the agreement or I'll need you to leave right now. Elena, Mark, something in my voice, or maybe just the 12 pages, stopped him. He looked at his mother. She looked at him. A whole conversation happened without words, and I watched it happen and noted that it was a conversation they had already had. This had been planned. The suitcases at the door, the performance of surprise, the casual certainty, all of it had been planned. He signed. Linda signed. I took the document, countersigned, photographed every page, and emailed it to Patricia. Then I made myself breakfast. 60 days is a long time to share a space with people who are waiting for you to break. I knew that's what it was by day 4. The nursery had taken me 3 months of evenings and weekends. The pale sage walls I'd painted myself, the white oak crib I'd assembled from a flat pack on a rainy Sunday, the blackout curtains I'd hung and adjusted twice to make sure they sat right, the rocking chair in the corner that had been my grandmother's and that I had shipped from Monterey at considerable expense because it was the only piece of furniture in my life that had a history to it. I had built that room the way I had built everything, carefully, deliberately, with full knowledge of its meaning. On day 7, I came home from a prenatal appointment to find Linda standing in the nursery doorway, admiring the floral curtains she had hung over mine. She had moved the rocking chair to the other corner. She had rearranged the dresser. She was looking at the room with the satisfaction of someone who has improved something. I stood in the doorway with the diaper bag cutting into my shoulder and breathed for 3 seconds. Take them down, I said, and put everything back exactly where it was. I was only trying to help. The curtains you had were so plain. Linda. I said her name the way I say a client's name when a conversation is about to change character. This is my home and my child's room. You are here as a temporary guest under a signed agreement that explicitly excludes this space. Take down the curtains. Move the rocking chair back. Do it now while I'm watching. She did it slowly. Every movement was theatrical, the careful martyrdom of someone performing unjust treatment for an invisible audience. She muttered something that included the word controlling, and something that I did not catch fully, but which included a phrase in a tone that I recognized. I took out my phone and started a voice memo, not secretly. I held it up where she could see it and let it run. She stopped muttering. I had started keeping records on day 1, quietly, systematically, the way I approached any project with unknown variables. Every text in which Mark referenced rent and acknowledged not paying it. Every bank transfer showing my payments for his share of expenses. A voice memo after each dinner, recorded in my locked office 5 minutes after the meal ended, describing what had been said and by whom and in what tone. On day 10, after a dinner in which Linda made 3 comments about the way I seasoned food, and 1 comment about children needing stability in the language in which they were raised, delivered with a smile so pleasant it could almost have passed for innocent, I texted Patricia and asked her to add a no threats, no harassment clause as a formal addendum. She drafted it in 2 hours. I printed 2 copies. I put them on the kitchen table the next morning. Addendum to the occupancy agreement, I said. Verbal threats, attempts to use the child's well-being as coercion, and targeted comments about my nationality or background background constitute immediate grounds for early termination of the agreement. Sign both copies. Mark's jaw tightened. You've had a lawyer add a harassment clause to a house agreement. Yes, he signed. His mother signed. I filed it with Patricia. The baby monitor I installed in the hallway on day 14 was not hidden. It was sitting on the small side table near the bathroom, the kind of monitor that looks like a standard white device. It was synced to a secure cloud account. Every 48 hours, I forwarded the audio files to Patricia, along with any new bank records or screenshots. I was building something. They were waiting for me to collapse under the weight of pregnancy and the 60 days and the exhaustion of being watched in my own home. We were both engaged in projects. Only one of us knew it. Day 38. I woke to the sound of Mark trying the handle on my office door at 11:54 p.m. I lay still and listened to him try it 3 times, the particular rhythm of someone who knows the door is locked and is testing whether that has changed since the last time. I had started wearing the office key on a chain around my neck on day 11. I listened to him walk back down the hall. I lay in the dark with my hand on my stomach and felt the baby move, a slow, rolling movement like she was adjusting herself, getting comfortable, asserting her presence. I thought, 11 more days. 11 days until the 60-day agreement expired. I could hold 11 days, but I didn't get 11 days. On day 42, I came home from a meeting with a client to find the hallway lined with boxes, not packed to leave. I know what packing to leave looks like. These were packed to stay. Organized, labeled, the kind of arrangement you make when you're setting up a new space and you want to know where everything is. Linda's handwriting on the labels in her neat, round script. Mark was on the couch. He had the lazy confidence of a man who has just played a card he's been holding for a while. Baby's coming any day, he said. No judge in this county is going to separate a newborn from her father, especially not from a single immigrant mother who works crazy hours and can barely manage on her own. The room tilted slightly. I stood in the hallway and felt the specific hold that comes not from temperature, but from understanding something you had been hoping not to understand. Linda came out of the kitchen, drying her hands on one of my dish towels. We consulted a family attorney, she said. With Mark already established as a resident and a father, he would have a very strong case for primary custody. The courts take stability very seriously. My phone was already in my hand. I opened the recording app, held it up, steady, screen facing out. Say that again, I said. I want to make sure my attorney has the exact wording. Linda's face changed. Mark's face changed. The silence that followed was the first honest thing that had happened in 42 days. I called Patricia at 8:06 p.m. that same night. Patricia Okonkwo had 21 years of family law and civil litigation, a reputation in the legal community for being quietly relentless, and the distinction, which she had mentioned once with complete seriousness, of never having lost a custody case involving documented financial exploitation. She answered on the second ring, which told me she had been waiting for my call. They made the threat, I said. On the recording? On the recording. Send it tonight. Already sent. I heard her exhale slowly, the way lawyers exhale when they have been given what they needed. Elena, I filed the emergency protective order application this morning. I need you to know. I filed it before you called, based on the 42 days of documentation you've been sending me. I sat down on the edge of my bed. You filed it before. The coercion was already there in the record. The financial exploitation, the harassment addendum violations, the attempted access to restricted spaces. The custody threat tonight gives us grounds for a no-contact clause. Are you ready for what happens next? My hand was pressing flat against my stomach. The baby was still, either sleeping or paying attention. Yes, I said. Good. The order will be granted in the morning. Once it's granted, their presence in your home is in violation. You can request security removal after 6 o'clock the following evening if they haven't left voluntarily. They won't leave voluntarily. You might be surprised, she said, what people do when they understand the documentation you've been keeping. The following morning, I placed the recording device on the kitchen table in plain sight. I sat across from Mark and Linda, and I read from a printed document while Patricia was on speakerphone. My attorney filed for an emergency protective order at 9:45 yesterday morning, I said. It was granted this morning at 8:15. Grounds: coercion, documented financial exploitation, harassment in violation of the signed addendum, and explicit custody threats made in my residence. Linda said, you can't. Exhibit A, I said, is 42 days of bank transfers demonstrating that Mark has paid nothing towards shared household expenses in direct violation of the signed agreement. Exhibit B is the voice recording from last night in which both of you explicitly threatened to use my citizenship status and work schedule against me in a custody filing. Exhibit C is audio from the hallway monitor documenting 14 separate incidents of comments targeted at my national origin. My attorney will send the full package to your attorney today. Mark's face had gone a strange color. Not red, something paler than that. The occupancy agreement ends early, I continued, effective today, on grounds of material breach of the harassment and threats clause. You have until 6 o'clock this evening to remove yourselves and your belongings voluntarily. After 6 o'clock, building security will come upstairs with the protective order. I folded the document, set it on the table. The door's right there. Linda looked at Mark. Mark looked at the table. The table said nothing useful to him. He stood up. He picked up the first box. I want to tell you about the 3 hours it took them to leave, because it was not the dramatic exit I'd half expected. It was slow and defeated and, in its way, more satisfying than a slammed door. Linda moved through the apartment like a woman who had lost a game she'd been playing for a long time. Mark carried boxes without looking at me, which was fine. I sat at the kitchen table and drank tea and let them do it. At 5:58, the last suitcase rolled past me into the hallway. Mark stopped at the elevator. He turned around and looked at me standing in my doorway. He had the look of a man arranging his face into something that might be interpreted as emotion. "I loved you," he said, voice quiet, almost convincing. "You loved what I could give you," I said. "There's a difference." The elevator came. The doors closed. I went inside, locked the door, pressed my back against it, and breathed. The baby moved. A long, slow, deliberate movement from left to right, like she was stretching, like she had decided the space was safe now and was getting comfortable. My phone buzzed. "Patricia. Elena. Mark's attorney filed something this morning, before the order was granted. You need to see this before the baby comes. I will not draw out the suspense. I've learned that some stories are worse when you try to make them elegant." What Mark's attorney had filed was a paternity and custody petition, preemptive, filed the same morning Patricia had filed the protective order, which meant Mark had been planning it for at least several days, possibly longer. The petition claimed he had established residency in the child's primary home, that he had contributed to household expenses and preparations for the child's arrival, and that separating him from the residence constituted parental alienation. Every claim in it was false. Every single one was directly contradicted by documentation I had been sending Patricia every 48 hours for 6 weeks. Patricia had me in her office at 9 the following morning. Her associate, a precise 30-year-old named James Caldwell, who specialized in documentation-heavy family cases, and who had apparently spent the previous evening reading everything I'd sent, laid out the response strategy on a whiteboard while I sat in a leather chair with my hands on my stomach and watched him work. "The financial records alone destroy the residency contribution claim," he said. "Exhibit A through Exhibit L." He pointed to the board. 42 bank transfers. 0 from Mark's account toward household expenses during the agreement period. 11 months of prior records showing the same pattern. "The harassment documentation," Patricia added, "specifically the audio from the hallway monitor and the threat recording, establishes that his presence in the home was coercive rather than consensual cohabitation. We argue he was there under a documented, temporary, conditional agreement, not as an established domestic partner." "What's the exposure?" I asked. Patricia and James exchanged a look. "Honestly, if the judge reviews the full record, minimal. The documentation is extremely complete." Patricia paused. "Elena, most clients who come to me in situations like this have a handful of texts and a memory. You have 6 weeks of time-stamped, organized, attorney-forwarded evidence that reads like a case file. Whoever advised you to start documenting early did you an enormous service." "Nobody advised me," I said. "I'm an engineer." James Caldwell made a note. The custody hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. Valentina came 4 weeks after that. 31 hours of labor, the kind that reorganizes your understanding of what your body is capable of, and then a small, furious, perfect person placed on my chest who looked up at me with her father's eyes in her grandmother's face and made a sound like she was already composing an opinion. I cried for approximately 2 minutes. Then I asked the nurse for water and my phone, in that order. Patricia had sent a message. The motion to dismiss was granted. Judge reviewed the full documentation package and dismissed Mark's custody petition with prejudice. He has standard visitation rights under the default paternity framework. That's it, your primary. I read it 3 times while Valentina slept on my chest. Dismissed with prejudice. It means he cannot file again on the same grounds. It means the 6 weeks of documentation, the midnight text to my attorney, the key worn on a chain around my neck, the voice memos and bank transfers and hallway monitor, all of it had done exactly what I had designed it to do. Mark exercised his visitation rights sporadically for the first 4 months. 3 visits, each of which he was punctual for the first and progressively late for the subsequent 2. The 4th scheduled visit he canceled by text 40 minutes before it was due to begin because of a work commitment. The 5th he did not appear for at all and did not contact me to explain. Valentina was 5 months old. She would not remember any of this. I filed a modification to the visitation order on the grounds of documented non-compliance. Judge Harriet Flores, 34 years on the family court bench, with a reputation for meticulous record review that Patricia had described as the best possible judge for a case built on documentation, granted the modification at a brief hearing in which Mark's attorney could not provide a coherent explanation for the missed visits. Mark was issued a formal notice. Comply with the schedule or lose the rights entirely. He did not comply. I did not chase him. That is perhaps the hardest thing I've had to learn, that some people reveal themselves through what they're willing to fight for, and that the kindest thing you can do for your child is refuse to perform a relationship on her behalf with someone who has already shown you his priorities. Valentina is 9 months old now. She has 4 teeth and an opinion about everything, and a habit, when she's trying to work something out, of frowning with exactly the concentration that I see in the mirror when I'm reading a set of load calculations. She is a person. A whole, specific, particular person. She lives in the apartment I built, in the nursery with the sage walls and the grandmother's rocking chair and the curtains I chose. Some evenings, after she's asleep and the apartment is quiet, I sit in that rocking chair in the dark and think about the night Mark and Linda arrived with their suitcases, about the way he smiled like he'd already won, about the way Linda looked at my refrigerator like she was taking inventory, about the fact that I let them in, not because I was weak, because I was paying attention, because I knew, with the bone-deep certainty guarantee of someone who has spent 20 years learning how structures fail, that the way to defeat a load is not to throw yourself against it. It's to understand it, document it, build something stronger than it, then wait for it to show you exactly what it is. He loved me. Maybe he did, but he loved what I could give him more. He loved the apartment, and the stability, and the uncomplaining competence of a woman who had built something from nothing, and was apparently easy to mistake for a foundation he could build on without asking permission. He made one miscalculation. Foundations don't move in, foundations hold.